now what's happened is our people expect to know the original context. So it went from, whoa, I feel like I learned so much every Sunday, to now that's an expectation.
It kind of made it feel like there's a whole nother level or a whole nother layer to what it is I've just given the last few decades of my life to.
Welcome to this episode of The Happy Rabbi and Friends. Today I am interviewing my good friends, Shawn and Sonny Hennessy from Green Bay, Wisconsin. You betcha. Is that what you guys say over there? No.
Oh, that's North.
That's Minnesota.
Yeah, maybe Minnesota. Yeah, but North Dakota for sure.
We'd say ope, but we don't.
Wait, ope?
I've never
Ope?
said
What's that in response to?
That's a very Wisconsin.
What's that in response to?
Kind of like, oh. I say, oh.
Oh.
Like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In Minnesota, they go, oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's kind of close. So you guys are both pastors together at Life Church in Green Bay. Been ministry how long?
25 years, 23 years, officially full
And
time.
okay. And so you guys are, let's see, I don't know if I can get all the things in there, but you guys are pastors, but you're also authors, and you're also entrepreneurs, and you're business owners, and you're parents, and you're too young to be all of those things. The beard helps, though.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. I had a girl ask me in Montreal, Canada, how I got my beard ombre. And I said, I'm old and all those things you just said.
Yes, it's natural. And Hennessy is Scottish, Irish.
Very
It's
Irish. Yep.
Yes, like the alcohol.
Our name is spelled the exact same way as the liquor.
Mhm.
We are also
Heirs to liquor.
heirs to the liquor empire that get no money. So add that to your list.
I
Are you-
married for
Are
money.
you actually related? Are
Yeah,
you related?
Yeah, way back. Way
Okay,
back.
right. But far enough that you get none of the residuals from none of the
Absolutely.
royalties.
I don't even get it free. So
Right. Okay, so somebody connected us, mutual friends connected us, and said you guys would love each other, which turned out to be true. But the way we met was pretty wild, because I was on sabbatical in 2017, and you and I, Shawn, met on Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem over falafel.
we did. Yeah, while our daughters at McDonald's.
Right. And we got our kids, right. We got our girls kosher McDonald's, and they just walked in circles around us while we talked for a few hours. But in that conversation, you had said that you had been a pastor for a long time already, but had grown really curious about Jewish context and Jesus as a Jewish person. And so where did that, I think it started with Ray Vanderlaan videos, right?
It did, yeah. I had a friend who is from the Pacific Northwest, who his wife used to work at whatever the thing was that was producing the Ray Vanderlaan videos, and she sent me one, and it was In the Dust of the Rabbi. And I mean, it was just so unlike anything I had ever heard. It kind of made it feel like there's a whole nother level or a whole nother layer to what it is I've just given the last few decades of my life to. And so I kind of started to watch some of the Ray content, but I wanted, I guess, more of a personal effect. And I thought, well, here's Ray, who is from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he's a Bible teacher at a high school there. And I want to get it from where he's getting it from. And so obviously he had discovered some sort of a rabbinical pipeline. And so I began to pray that God would send me really a personal rabbi. And as you said, a girl who had been one of Sonny's interns was in your congregation in Seattle. and she said, "You should meet my rabbi. He's amazing." And as you said, she was right. And it's begun more than a friendship and a partnership, but it's I think it reignited my, that hunger you have when you're in seminary that you can almost lose when you're doing it day to day. It reignited that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's important. Important for everyone in my congregation to hear that at least I inspired somebody. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think about the Jewishness of Jesus? I mean, you both can answer. What do you think Jewish context has done for your faith? If there's like specific thoughts or stories that have kind of, that changed paradigms for you and.
Well, I can speak from hearing it from Shawn, and then also I went to Israel a couple times now, and that hearing the context of the Bible, the way it was written and who it was written for prior to going to Israel, then going to Israel and then coming back, it was, I mean, we tried to take a trip for our whole congregation to Israel, and it was going to be in April April of the pandemic. So that
right.
And Israel got shut down. But hearing sermons within the context just brought it to life, and we wanted our people to really see it too. But I think what's been great is it created this like hunger. But now what's happened is our people expect to know the original context. So it went from, whoa, I feel like I learned so much every Sunday, to now that's an expectation. Like, if you don't teach me something that I didn't hear in Sunday school, like, And so he's really upped the level to where that is old hat to know, like, of course you're going to tell me the original Hebrew. Like, what does that really mean? And I see even our staff pastors, they know you don't get to preach just the surface anymore. So that's been great.
Yeah, I think for me, it simultaneously made the story bigger and smaller. And so it opened up entire trails I didn't know existed. Maybe you couldn't see them because of the trees. But at the same time, specifically going to Israel, as Sonny said, it just made the whole thing so small. Like, to see the Sea of Galilee and how small it really was. I think initially I envisioned the Sea of Galilee as the Pacific Ocean.
Right, like an ocean, yeah.
No, I can see across this thing, east to west and north to south. And so it shrunk it down. And then now, of course, with this hunger, I think, for Jewish context among evangelicals, which is just fed by The Chosen. So now when you watch The Chosen, you go, oh, well, I've been there. I know exactly what that looks like. It's like if somebody has never been to Seattle, they can't understand the context within which you do ministry and the difficulties with which you do ministry. And if you don't know the cultural nuances of this city, you can't go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're actually a rabbi in a city that doesn't want God. So once you know that about you and about your context, it makes it more real and realistic, and it lets you understand how to process that. And so understanding this Jewishness of Jesus, I think it's, as they'd say, it wet my whistle more. Like, it feels like it's more getting to know my friend now than it is studying something for a message or a degree.
The other thing is, I think bringing the Jewish context into a Gentile or into a congregation or a church is, I think it made me personally, and I think I can speak for our congregation, less selfish. Because if you realize Jesus was a Jew, and he and his disciples were Jewish, and then they wrote to Jews. And then they said, yeah, come on in, Gentiles, after, he died for us and he came to earth. It makes it less selfish, because America is the great superpower, right? And so I think it made people step a little outside of themselves and their selfishness, which Christians can tend to get into, right?
Yeah. I found when I speak at churches for the first time, I think I said it at yours as well, but I usually have the context minute to say, like, I'm gonna call him Yeshua, like Jesus is still his name in English, but Yeshua is what his mother called him and what his friends called him. And he never heard the name Jesus in his lifetime. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's used to it by now, is my joke. But, but people get really funny. Like I get funny reactions, when you're preaching and looking at everybody's faces, you get funny reactions of like, Jesus didn't speak English. And people go, oh, right, because he's not, but it's like, it's not something you would ever think about, right? It's not something you even realize that you're thinking in your head, but there's, we end up putting Jesus in our context because that's all we know. Like you said, Shawn, there's a hunger in American evangelical Christianity for deeper, older, like give me more than just the 300 years that evangelicism has existed. And so it seems to me that it's a part, one of the things that God is doing in our generation is bringing Jewish context back through that, through what we're experiencing in our culture. So it was funny to meet, it was really all around the same, just probably in the last 5 or 6 years, that relationships like ours are happening all the time, where people are like, oh man, I need to like understand more. And then, my sort of similar to Jesus in a sense. I'm not saying I'm Jesus, but I get people meet me and then they're like, which I think happens for you guys too. But people meet me and go, I've never met a rabbi that dresses the way you dress or talks the way that you talk, or, so it's like a whole nother context, because it's like, I need a rabbi in my life, which most people think of my dad. This is what people think of when they think of a rabbi, which your beard is much better than mine. It's much more rabbinic.
Yes.
People's experience in Wisconsin, I think I've learned from you guys, is mostly, if they've been to church, it's Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coming from a place of having to minister to people that have a very specific background that's different than what you're doing. And where, like in Seattle, people are generally not religious at all and have no affiliation with anything. So, how do you figure out ways, which Paul is really the first to do, right? Paul takes he's like the most trained, the most scholarly of any of the writers of the New Testament when it comes to the Torah. But then he's also a Roman citizen. And so he knows how to live in both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
If he finds himself in a conversation with rabbis and Torah scholars, he's right in there. But among Roman citizens and in the middle of a town square, he knows exactly what he's supposed to do as a Roman, which is such an amazing.
We were talking last night about a company that started in one city and then said, we're going to go do exactly the same thing in the next city. And we've been at churches where it was like, what we're doing in this state, we can just take church the way we do it here, go do it exactly the same in that state because we're super successful. And I think what you're saying is so true. You're in an unchurched, unreligious city. Wisconsin is Catholic or Lutheran, like one or the other, but mainly Catholic. And so both need to be cut through with something that goes far back beyond any of the history of that city. That's what will break through, not a culture of a church or a culture of a congregation or even of a company that thinks they can surpass the culture of the city. I don't think you don't get to come in and think you're going to break through the culture of a city the same way. And you're right. That's exactly what Paul did. Shawn did a whole series in the pandemic behind his desk when we were closed down.
Right. Yeah.
Talk about that because
I Romans, right? Yeah.
Romans, and man, he talked about what you're saying with Paul. Like
that was great.
We felt, and we even added, Keith did, our video editor, who you know well. the cinematic or pictures, and he took them from Israel, from the Holy Land, not just like, let's make it relevant to today, but no, let's go back to the Colosseums and the streets of Rome. And that was a good series.
Well, it was a series on Romans where I never talked about Romans. So I spent 6 months really talking about Paul, about what we learned in school, the who, what, when, where, why, and who wrote this, when did he write it, where did he write it, why did he write it, and this idea of Paul was the master of immersing himself in the culture that he found himself and discovering what that culture was. And so then his communication style was predicated upon the culture and environment that he found himself in. And that's the thing that a lot of people, let's say from the church environment, when you plant churches, they've started to discover that, right? So you go to a city, you move to a city, you either knew that city before you got there, or you should live in that city for a little while before you launch some sort of a ministry, so you understand who the people are and where they're coming from. Because it's difficult when you have a view of someone and then you meet them and that view is different. Like, you have assumptions. Maybe you've even met him on the phone. I had a friend who I met him when I was in Bible college. He was the head of the youth department for the state of North Carolina for the Assemblies of God. And we talked a dozen times on the phone before we ever met. And so I had an image in my mind of who this person was, what he would look like, all of this different stuff. And when I met him, he was different than I had imagined in my mind. And it took me a minute to be able to reframe him inside his framework as opposed to inside ours. And I think we have that same challenge when it comes to Jesus, is that we've built this framework of who he is. And, I mean, like, if you met Jesus and he didn't have long hair or a beard, like, would you be able to process that? Because we've even built an image, some of that off of pictures, some of that off of the culture back then, where, like, if you'd have met, like, if you saw a real picture of Jesus, of what he looked like what if Jesus, like, didn't have a beard and he had a flat top? It would be like, bro, that's not Jesus at all. Like, it's, but you'd have a hard time processing who he is, because he's built all these false images of who he is. And so when you take this book that was written by Jews, to Jews, for Jews, and you put it into a non-Jewish context, you have to put yourself into its context rather than the opposite. It's like when you read Shakespeare. Most people hate Shakespeare because they don't understand the context, that you have an English author writing English literature to an English crowd who understood that language. Like, I don't think he wouldn't have survived this long if, when he wrote his plays, they weren't understood in the context to which he wrote them. But they have become timeless because the people who wrote them understood them. Or you have to understand the style of writing. So, like, if you go, well, Shakespeare is poetry, then you read it like poetry. But, like, if you read Poe, like, some people love Edgar Allan Poe, some people hate it. But, like, is it weird? It is weird, unless you understand that it's macabre and you go, well, there's a way that you're supposed to read that style of writing. And so when you go through scriptures and you understand that they're, like, it's not like reading Jesus Never Said Anything New, where you start at page 1 and you go to the last page and it's one continuous narrative. It's different books written at different times by different people in different styles. Some of them are prose, some of them are poetry, but all of them were written in a different cultural context. So this idea of us, most of us who have this hunger for this are in our 40s. So rather than having a midlife crisis where I buy a Corvette, I'm having a midlife crisis where I'm questioning everything I've ever read, taught, or believed. And if you strip back this idea of your faith, I think that's what's happening in the evangelical church. You have a whole generation of guys who are about to take over, or who have taken over things, who are stripping the paint off of it and going, wait a minute, there's rust underneath here. I got to fill some of this in with Bondo before I repaint this thing. And while they're stripping away the paint, they're finding flaws and deficiencies that they never knew about. And so which can be dangerous if you don't have the right guide in that. And so back to your question of, like, how did we meet? Like, I wanted a guide. I wanted somebody who has worked on cars before, who has stripped away paint and filled in the holes and then repainted. So like I didn't want to just go to another evangelical who went to another Christian seminary. And for you, this is a generational thing. Like your brother's a rabbi, your dad's a rabbi, your uncle's a rabbi. And so yes, you're a young guy who's a rabbi in Seattle, but you also have a dad who's a rabbi on the East Coast and a brother who's a rabbi in the Midwest. So you have more of a cultural breadth to you. And you're married to a non-Jew. So that gives you an even different context.
That's right.
That's why when we talk to guys who say, well, hey, listen, I want a rabbi. Here's a guy who gets it. And then in the process, you've introduced us to other rabbis. Mm-hmm. This network of older guys and other young guys. And it's expanded what we believe, but in expanding what we believe, it stripped it down to the bare metal and then rebuilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the midlife crisis thing, because I think that's, a lot of people are, there's a word out there that a lot of people are using, deconstruction of faith. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are deconstructing things that should be deconstructed. Like there are misunderstandings and misrepresentations of the scripture and of who Yeshua is. But when you start tearing things down, right, it's important what foundation you lay and how you build it up. Because a lot of the deconstruction people, former pastors and former singers and deconstructed, but then built some of the opposite problems of the things they deconstructed, right? Through in their frustration. So, how you find, there's so much information out there, just part of this is like the blessing of the time we live in, and also the difficulty of the time we live in is you can find any information you want anywhere to say anything that you wanted to say. And that's, it complicates what, and I think even for Jewish context, there's this kind of false idea that there was one Jewish thought, or like, this is what Jews believed in the first century, when in reality, there's as many divisions and changes and arguments, as there are today. So when people are like, well, that's because Jews believe, no, that's not how that works. If you're going to be specific, you got to talk about Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, like the Qumran, like there's all these different groups that are doing different things. But it's also interesting because, we've talked about this before, but one of the big differences between Judaism and Christianity, modern Judaism and modern Christianity, is Judaism is comfortable with disagreement, and that the two people who disagree could both be right.
Yeah.
Whereas in most Christian circles, it's, this plus this equals Orthodox Christianity. And if you miss one of those, you're out. And there's but in Judaism, it's kind of like, well, here's the very few things we know for sure. Like there is a God and I'm not him. Other than that, I have a whole lot of opinions that may or may not turn out to be true.
Right.
And in Jewish circles, it's, there's mysteries that belong to God that we can't answer. So I'll tell you what I think, but I'm not really positive, which I think is fair. Like we've had a few conversations, Shawn, where you were like, I need the Jewish context of this. I'm like, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And you're like, come on, man.
These are your people, bro. Yeah.
in the church, I think we call it unity. Like, we just need unity, even in a city. Churches are like, we need to have a unity breakfast and we want to all be on the exact same page, no matter what denomination in church. And if not, we're like, the pastors in our city don't unite and all this stuff. And I'm like, within your church, you're all wanting and thinking and keeping unity. And that's why when you don't agree or they don't agree, they go to a different church. But if we could agree to disagree and know that, in fact, our tour guide, Ruti, she Jewish by birth, not a believer.
Lives in a kibbutz.
Yeah, lives in a kibbutz her whole life. And she was our tour guide. And every question I asked, she answered with no, and then answered. And sometimes I'd ask a question like, Ruti, over there, is that the pear tree? Da, da, da. No, da, 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 da. That's the pear tree. I'm like, why do you answer with a no? But in America, we want to say, yes, you're right. It's a pear tree. And let's have this false sense of peace. And I was like, why should you keep answering no? But because everything is a debate.
Yeah, she was easy to get along with and difficult to get along with all at the same time. She was easy to get along with because she was lovely. But she was difficult to get along with because she was confrontational.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking when you said that thing about the deconstruction of your faith, the problem is that a lot of people aren't deconstructing, they're demolishing. And there's a difference between deconstruction and demolition. Like if you go and you redo a house, you go, well, let's tear this apart. And so you do it with a sledgehammer. But if you're going to deconstruct a house because it's a historical home and you want to preserve the things that are there, you want to preserve the moldings and some of the woodwork. It's got copper pipe inside of it. So that's worth something. You don't want to tear that apart. So you're trying to maintain the original character of it. So you don't go in with a sledgehammer, you go in with a pry bar. And so many guys, I think, are trying to demolish their faith because we're so one side or the other. And like I think that there's a time where we can demolish our faith and there's a time where we can deconstruct it. But if you deconstruct it, that means you keep the original materials and you can repurpose those things. And there's moldings, 3.5 inch crown moldings that you can't even reproduce anymore. They're just, they don't make it anymore. So you have to salvage what you can so that you can maintain the original character, right? And so even in this idea of why can't we just agree to agree? We can agree to disagree. There are times to do that, but there are also times to agree. Well, what do you agree on? I agree that you don't know what you're talking about, and I don't know what I'm talking about. So let's figure this thing out together. Like we can agree on the fact that, but we're so combative. Like I have to be right and you have to be wrong. Like, why does there have to be a winner and a loser? Why can't there be 2 winners or be 2 losers? And we go, well, we both lose, so let's figure out how to win together. And that's part of the relational dynamic of a pastor who submits himself to a younger rabbi who says, hey, listen, I don't know all the answers. But like, there's a lot of other things that I don't know all the answers to either. Like, I don't know how to maintain a garden. So if I wanted to be a master gardener, it shouldn't matter to me if the person who I learned from is 81 or 18. It just takes somebody who knows more about that than me. And then when I start to learn more about it, I can't get arrogant about it and then throw that person away. Go, well, thanks. I got what I needed from you. So I want to reconstruct my faith because like I want to go to heaven.
Right. I mean, there's things that are non-negotiable for sure. Like, Yeshua is Lord.
Right.
He's like fully God and fully man. So if somebody comes, I mean, I'm happy to talk about why they believe he's not, but if you're not willing to even, if you come to a point where you just don't believe that and you're unwilling, then, our congregation's not the right place for you.
Right.
It's not mean. It's just, there's a few core things. Beyond that we can, but I was thinking too about mentoring as a term. Because I think what you're alluding to is there isn't like, I've heard Andy Stanley and Craig Rochelle and all these guys say there isn't like the idea that there's one person out there that can teach you everything.
Right.
Is the false idea of mentoring, right? What you just said about gardening as an example is you have to find people who are good at the thing you want to get better at. They're not trying to like help you in every area of your life. But if you can get advice and time and relationship on, I see that you do this thing well, and I want to do that thing better. But you're not, nobody does everything. So the idea that you just have one person who can teach you all the things you need to know is, I think is a false idea of mentoring. But that's also probably entrepreneur part of you guys, right? I mean, you got to always like
Yeah.
find.
What I think is interesting is what your point you just made. I have heard Christians, or not just pastors, but Christians be like, but in the Bible, there was a rabbi and you were assigned to a rabbi. And it's taken out of context. And it's like, they walked alongside and taught everything. It's like, yeah, but the mom taught some stuff. The father, we know that, Joseph was a carpenter with tectone, and he taught Jesus. So the rabbi didn't just teach everything. And so we've even taken out of context to prop up the fact I need to find that woman for me who's going to teach me everything, her ways. And then what happens is when that person doesn't call us back or text us back or seem as interested, we're hurt, and then we blame it on them and God, and we walk away. So yes, we have people that we look to for business, not just podcasts, but we're mentored through podcasts sometimes, but specific people who are good at their craft.
Yeah, if that idea wasn't true, then they wouldn't be making tens and tens of millions of dollars off the masterclass course, where you can learn anything you want. Like I can learn about hockey from Wayne Gretzky, or I can learn about how to write a film from Martin Scorsese. And I'm not going to do either of those things at 48 years old. But it's still interesting.
Right.
Principles of greatness are interlinked.
I'd like to see you try hockey, though. I'd like to see you try hockey.
He played hockey.
I did.
Of course he did.
Of course he did.
My whole life.
Yep.
You can't come from where I come from and not play hockey. It's in your blood. Yep. Hallelujah. I haven't skated in, man, it's been 25
I've seen
years.
you skate within 15, and he still can skate backwards fast. And I'm like, what's happening?
Yes. I can't get this hockey stop. I can do backwards and I can do all of it, but I can't do like the fast.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
You got to learn that when you're young. I mean, like I started skating, I was 2.
Yeah.
As soon as I could
scary.
walk, I was skating.
Funny. Yeah, that's Detroit, because you were in Detroit.
Yeah, I was born in Canada. So it's actually another misnomer. You know that hockey's not the national sport of Canada. People think it is, but it's not. It's lacrosse.
Really?
There you go. You learned something today. You are more Canadian than you were before.
Now I have to deconstruct everything I know about Canada.
Yeah. Hot dogs and maple syrup are a fact, though.
Yes, I believe that. One thing I've learned from you guys that I would consider you mentors in is generosity. I feel like you are 2 of the most generous people I've ever met, both personally and as leading your congregation. Like you guys have been generous to me and my family personally, but Life Church has also been generous to restoration. So why is generosity so important to you guys?
You answer it, because he's the more generous one. He leads the way.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question that I've never drilled down on. I think when I really got into ministry, I had people that were just generous with me and not even financially generous. And the more generous that I am with others, the more generous God is with me. And along the way, I've just been given different little resources of how to give and why to give. And of course, I mean, we read the Dave Ramsey stuff but the base principles of that, of not living above your means, that helped. And this idea of the more that you give, the more God will trust you with. And then, of course, reading the Robert Morris book, The Blessed Life, that was a game changer. I'm reading a book right now. It's really old. It's so out of print that you can't buy it on Amazon. And it's called God's Law of First Things by Keith Craft. And it's just all about generosity. It's about the order of your generosity, which was revealing to me. And so the more I changed the order of how I gave, the more generous God was with me. And so
I was just going to say, it's a good point. Like, it's become money that we're more generous with now. But it did start when we didn't have the money, but we could be generous with our connections, with our relationships, with our influence. We always had interns from youth ministry on. We were always training the 14 and 15-year-old, and then being generous with any connections, relationships.
Yeah.
Like, we don't hold tight to our relationships and say, well, they're my friends, and if they become your friends, or they get to know you as a pastor, you're going to steal them from us.
Yeah.
And then it translates later into money.
We've experienced whatever it is you're generous with, God will give you more of.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's a few parables about that.
Yeah. I know a Jewish guy
Rest
who came up with some of those ideas.
Yeah. Well, I sure love you guys.
Love you,
I'm
man.
grateful for our relationship and our congregations being related through our relationship. And I love all the things you guys do. Sometimes I sit back and think, I don't know how they do all the things that they do. Some of that stuff seems crazy to me. But knowing you guys and knowing your hearts and the heart behind why you do all the things that you do, just makes me appreciate you guys all the more.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's nice.
Love you, brother.
Yes, we love you guys.